Hi, everyone, and welcome to the final live stream in the ITIL 4 Turns 2 celebration series. This session is going to be focused on some of our lead architects from the UK and Europe. We've got a fabulous panel that I'll introduce in a moment. But if you want to watch any of the other live stream panels that we've done, you can check them out on our YouTube page. We did one on Monday this week, which featured Katrina McDermott, Erin Castile, and Takashi Yagi from APAC. We did one on Wednesday, which featured Troy Dumoulin, Lou Honeybeck, and Mauricio Corona, featuring the Americas. And now we're going to be talking to our European and British architect team members, and one honorary British team member and I'll start into the introduction. So with the lower left on my screen is Roman Zhuravlev, who most of you recognize as the head of ITIL's product development initiatives for the last 3 years. Roman, originally from Russia, but now transplanted to the UK, is someone who shuns social media. So I would say possibly if you want to talk to him about anything, the best place to do that would be LinkedIn. Moving clockwise then, the next person up is Barclay Ray, who is an independent consultant and advisor, as well as a director with various industry bodies such as Service Desk Institute. He's also a podcast host, having just launched the Enterprise Digital podcast, talking about enterprise service management, IT service management, and everything in between. And you can find him on Twitter and LinkedIn. And I believe you have your own website, barclayray.com.
That's right. Yep.
Correctly?
Thank you, actually. Yep.
And then moving on, the very colorful gentleman is Stuart Rance, who's a long-time contributor to ITIL, and of course, most recently, ITIL 4. Stuart can also be found on various social media platforms, as well as his website, which is optimalservicemanagement.com. And last but certainly not least is Marcel Federer, who is with ITpreneurs based out in the Netherlands. And he's the head trainer, not just for ITIL, but for a number of different frameworks. I believe you also act as a DASA ambassador, if I'm not mistaken.
Not an ambassador, but I have some influence, but I'm playing a role in the DASA organization. Yeah.
You're a DASA influencer.
No, not officially, but I try to influence.
Excellent. So welcome everyone, one and all, and welcome to our audience as well. The way we've kicked things off is to go back in time, set the DeLorean machine to sort of January 1st, 2018, if you will, when we started working on ITIL 4. And in a sort of round robin fashion, and I'll go anti-clockwise this time. So I'll start with yourself, Marcel. What were some of the positive things that were happening in the service management community? Where did you see ITIL version 3 working well? And equally, if you want to share some of the challenges that you observed at that time, what would you like to share?
Yeah, what I saw in many different kind of organizations on a worldwide scale, that ITIL was really, or is still, seen as the de facto good practice framework to deal with service management organizations. Widely accepted, well known, and people were very enthusiastic. I delivered many version 3 courses all over the world for big companies, for small companies, and they are all very enthusiastic. Some challenges that I recognized is that I was afraid at that time, and I'm still afraid that they look to ITIL at that time, when you look at ITIL version 3 or 2011, that the different life cycle stages were seen as separate departments in an organization. So many organizations, they looked at the core model as a sequential model, and it was also perceived as more or less a waterfall approach, an old-fashioned approach, not really agile. While personally, I think you can go through the different life cycle stages multiple times a day or per hour, it doesn't matter. But it was perceived in the market as an old-fashioned way for people that were working in agile and DevOps environments. And still you hear people talking about, we are going to implement ITIL. That is, I think, not a good idea, because you can use and look at ITIL as a toolbox. And depending on the job that you need to accomplish, the goal that you need to achieve, also in your private life, depending on the job, you use a hammer or a saw, right? And that's also the way I look at ITIL. Depending on the objective you need to achieve, the issue that you want to solve, you pick up the right tool to deal with the issue. The goal should not to implement the whole toolbox.
Absolutely.
And that is still the case in many organizations, unfortunately.
Very true. Stuart, I'll come to you next with that same question. I mean, as a consultant and a trainer yourself, there were a lot of lessons that you learned that you brought into our workshops and so on. What were some of the main challenges or positive things that you saw in the industry at that time?
I'll start with some of the positives. From way back when, ITIL introduced a common vocabulary, a common language to IT service management that was hugely valuable. I remember back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when somebody explained to me the difference between an incident and a problem, and it fundamentally changed some aspects of how I work and made me much more responsive to the things some of my customers cared about. So that common language, which ITIL has always had and continues to have, is really, really important and was probably the biggest value it brought to many of our customers. With ITIL v3, I think the biggest thing that ITIL v3 brought was the concept that a service is based on value, outcomes, costs, and risks. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, the view within IT service management had generally been, you have an SLA, the SLA says what you're going to deliver. If you deliver the SLA, your customer must be happy. With ITIL v3, we introduced this idea that services are about value, outcome, costs, and risks. And I would regularly run training courses where I would write those 4 words on the biggest piece of paper I could find and stick it up on the wall. And I'd come back to it many times a day to help focus the people around me on what was really, really important about what we're doing. Drawbacks with ITIL v3, we never managed to break the belief that ITIL was a set of processes that you had to implement, ideally as a set of silos in life cycle stages that were also a set of silos, and that if you didn't do what it said on page 42, paragraph 3, sentence 2, you weren't doing ITIL. I don't know why, because we talked adapt and adopt. I don't think we talked enough about how people should adapt and adopt. And maybe as we talk about ITIL 4 later, we'll get to that in a bit more detail.
Fair point. Barclay, from your perspective, what sort of lessons would you like to share based on your work prior to starting with ITIL 4?
Certainly on the positive side. I mean, and there were many positives that had developed over time, and you know, they'd seen the growth of ITIL and ITSM, you know, over the previous 10, 15, 20 years. I think, you know, the taxonomy is one that's been mentioned, the shared taxonomy. I think as well that for me, one of the big things was that the sense that there were a number of processes, whatever we want to call them, but that were more strategic and more integrated across an organization, wider than just service and support. So we had a sort of service desk and service support activities, incident knowledge management, problem change, and so on. But all the other things that were there as well. And I think over time, in version 3, I think did go into quite a lot of good detail around all the other capabilities. The spread of ITIL was very encouraging. I just over time, and I'm not a trainer as such, but I'd certainly in consulting world had come to be very careful about how I approached the ITIL word when I was talking with a new prospect, and I would let them lead with it, quite simply because if very often if I led with ITIL, they would immediately put me into a bit of a box and say, right, well, so you're going to tell me about processes now. Oh, we want to do this, but we're not going to do it like the book. And I'd be going, well, yeah, that's the whole point. You don't look at, but at that time it was gone already, and I think there were so many things that just weren't working in terms of the image of it, the way that DevOps and Agile had come into our world and were looking cool and modern, and ITIL was looking a bit dated. So I didn't feel that the version 3 foundation, it relied too much on great trainers like Marcel and Stuart to do the right thing, whereas I felt a lot of organizations were sheep dipping people through it, and the value part wasn't happening enough. And organizations were thinking, well, we put everybody through that, and suddenly we've got this new enlightened organization. It just wasn't happening. So all those things, the whole SLA culture, where I come from on that with the watermelon and so on, but there was a lot of things that needed to be fixed. Lots of goodwill, and as we discovered, particularly when ITIL 4 came out, the goodwill and the desire to make it work have been really, really palpable. So
absolutely,
yeah.
We do have one other trainer in our midst. I mean, we've lost Stuart, and I hope that he's able to rejoin soon. But we do have another trainer in our midst, and I possibly didn't mention this when I first introduced him, but I saw him smiling whilst Stuart was talking about some of his training activities. And Roman, you were a trainer as well as a business owner. You set up what is now the most successful ATO in Russia, if I remember the reports correctly. But what was your experience with ITIL, the good and the bad, and the experience with the IT service management community in general, the good and the bad, in the run up to ITIL 4?
It really feels like it was ages ago. Well, many important things that I was thinking of sharing have been just shared by Barclay and Marcel and Stuart. However, what I would like to add here, ITIL 3 prepared the community to some steps that although they probably haven't been made exactly back in 2017, or by 2017, when we started actively working on ITIL 4, they definitely prepared the soil for it. And I am talking about expanding ITSM, the notion of ITSM, to a wider scope than just support and some basic delivery processes. So service strategy, continual improvement, things that were either introduced or, let's say, re-emphasized by the third version were extremely important. And I think we need to mention a book that was published back in 2016, and to a large extent became a foundation for ITIL 4 Foundation, and this is ITIL Practitioner publication. This is where ITIL guiding principles were introduced, and this is where the importance of communication and organizational change management, so things that we are currently considering or among the key concepts of ITIL 4. They were originally created in the first AXELOS publication of ITIL, which was ITIL Practitioner, published back in 2016. I believe it was really important.
Absolutely.
Thing that actually preceded what eventually became ITIL 4. On the less positive side, silo mentality was my number one on the list of the less positive sides, and that tool. I don't use hammers or saws much in my private life. Marcel, I'm really curious how your private life goes now. But on a more serious note, yes, perception of ITIL as a toolbox that you should be using according to the common sense and the task at hand is something that we didn't manage to communicate well enough or persuade people well enough in. And another thing is, yes, this silver bullet cargo culting thing that happened. And for better or worse, ITIL 4 is a bit too large to be implemented in we installed it in this silver bullet manner, and I hope it will kind of stimulate this tool mentality rather than silver bullet mentality in people who are using it. Already stimulates as far as we can see.
Yeah, it's there's some important points, and really good shout out to ITIL Practitioner. That was a lot of people do refer to ITIL Practitioner as ITIL 3.5, for example, and it really was a seminal piece of work that heavily influenced our thinking when it came to ITIL 4. Because I think, if I remember correctly, ITIL Practitioner even had references to things like Cynefin and Wardley maps and so on, which we built on when it came to ITIL 4. I mean, I think everyone's covered most of the salient points, but there is one other, a couple other points that I think bear mentioning. I think whilst ITIL version 3 had a lot of really good information, at foundation level, the nuances of how and when to apply or not apply and how to adapt and so on really came into play in ITIL intermediate training. And I think a lot of people went on foundation, but careers took them elsewhere. So over time, I think we ended up with the perception that ITIL was this overload of 26 processes and not much flexibility and so on, because they didn't have the opportunity to read the books or learn about the sort of contextual application and when not to even apply some of the guidance and how to customize it to the contextual needs of the organization and so on. Certainly in my mind, that was something that I wanted to make sure we addressed with ITIL 4, which is a good segue to the ITIL 4 development program itself. Now, Stuart's rejoined us. Thank you, Stuart. I'm glad you could recover from your whatever catastrophic technical failure you had at your end. But let's talk about the ITIL 4 development program itself and some of our fondest memories, not just of the workshops and so on, but if you even want to pick a specific concept, perhaps that you wrote about or that you were the first to talk about it, or whatever it might be, that you're especially proud of as your contribution to ITIL 4. So you know what, I'll go in reverse order this time. So Roman, if you'd like to go first with this one, what are some of your fondest memories of ITIL 4 development, and is there something specific that you are especially proud of?
Not much a developer here, I would say, or if I can like get credit for anything in ITIL 4 development, this is for persuading some people to join the team. And basically, yeah, I am particularly proud of some of the contributors, not only for ITIL 4 Foundation architects, but also for the brilliant team of the lead editors that we had for the Managing Professional publications. Barclay, one of them. Lou was the lead editor for DPI, and Christian Nissen for CDS, for DSV. CDS is Barclays, apologies, Barclay. And Mark Smalley for HVAT, and of course David Cannon, who later became, and together with Erica Flora, lead editor for digital and data strategy. So all those teams, lead editors teams, and some reviewers, that was something, I believe the team actually made ITIL 4. And since it's basically actually yours and my responsibility to a great extent to build these teams and to persuade people working sometimes, I was about to say sometimes hard, sometimes after their day job, in their spare time, in their private time, to contribute to ITIL development. This is something I still am very proud of. There are also some nice ideas within the books that I kind of contributed to, but people are more important here. And this also reflects my main like good memories of how we have been developing it, especially now when you know, recalling some moments where we actually could sit together somewhere in one location, and have a nice meeting somewhere in the Netherlands or in the US or here in London, and then go to some nice place after that meeting. It sounds almost impossible now, but hopefully this time will come back.
I'll ask the same questions to the others, but I do want to riff on one point you mentioned, which was the persuading people to join the effort. You know, the thing that I'm doubly proud of as being part of this program on that point is the fact that we took the time to find people from around the world. You know, so we could bring in perspectives and contexts from places as far afield as Australia or Japan or Latin America, as the case may be. And of course, we had a wider network beyond the lead architects. We had a wider network of people who are contributing and reviewing and pitching in ideas and so on. And I think sort of harnessing the global network, I think, was something that we should, as you say, very rightly be proud of.
I will add to this, because this is probably another thing that I believe was a very important change from version 3 to 4th. We decoupled practices from the. We created like a equally large space of content for the practices, and the number of people who contributed to authoring, reviewing, to creating the practices, it was amazing. It was such a great, less visible, maybe less exposed, but such a great team of specialists in these specific areas. And we generally, I believe, managed quite well to make it a consistent body of knowledge rather than 34 isolated pieces.
That's
so
true.
That was also another thing that I'm quite proud of.
Very true. Marcel, I'll come to you next. What were some of your sort of fond memories from that development period, and is there any sort of concept that you'd like to highlight for our?
Yeah, first of all, that I had the chance to participate in this very challenging and interesting journey that we made together, right? So that made me feel proud about it. But yeah, what I remember from it is that from the beginning, the cooperation was already very high from the start already, right? It was a very good thing. We did it together, what Roman was talking about. We worked together with people from all over the world, and that was a really good experience, right? And we took each other, of course, serious. We also listened to each other. Of course, people in service management are egos, but yeah. Yeah, but we were able to deal with each other and respect each other, and that was a very good experience. What I really liked, yes, and what I really appreciated was and remember, that was the very interesting in-depth discussions about the service value chain, for example, how we created that together. A lot of different insights, perspectives, and that resulted at the end in the service value chain that we have right now. And that is, yeah, that is one of the highlights, actually.
Excellent. Yeah. Barclay, I'll come to you with that same question. What were your fond memories, and were there any sort of concepts that you think you are especially proud of?
Well, you mentioned the ITIL Practitioner, and I was one of the co-authors on that, and I am very proud of that book and the various parts of that. I had come into that with a desire to have some kind of structure or core principles, but I had envisaged them as being actually much more basic than what we ended up coming up, because I'd always had this thing. I would go and talk to people and they would say, what are the core principles of ITIL? And I'd have to kind of invent them there on the spot, or it would be my opinion on what they were compared to anybody else's. And I thought it'd be great if we did something like that. What we actually came up with was 100 times better than that, and I'm very proud to have seen that on the walls and lots of service desks and operational rooms and so on in the last few years. I wrote the communications part in that book, and again, that's one that I'm quite proud of. And when we came on to doing the things like Foundation and the CDS book, I was just very pleased to have been part of something where we got in a lot of the broader thinking, you know, about people management, employee satisfaction, structure, culture, certainly communications, and this whole, you know, the guiding principles being something where it opens up you know, it gives you that freedom and flexibility to work in context. And somebody asked me the other day, what's the word that best describes the outcome of ITIL 4, and I came up with context. I think it changes the context of where IT service management sits. A lot of the functional stuff is still, you know, incident management still what it was, pretty much. But the context of it has changed. In the world that we operate in has moved. There's more people, there's more governance, corporate, enterprise, all these other things are there where they could easily be dismissed before as it being kind of operational. So that's that stuff. And somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, you got watermelon SLAs in," and I was really pleased about that. But actually, the thing about the group, and I think Marcel was saying it as well, was that people did really, you know, the group in the room. If you're in that room, it was a fantastic experience. There were times that it reminded me of being in some of my philosophy classes at university, and I was sitting there going, "What the hell are they on about? Oh my God, do we really need to spend 3 hours talking about this?"
Are you now referring to it as a positive or negative experience?
I'll leave you to decide. But actually, then you would find, you would come right. I mean, the thing there in terms of Roman's input was, you know, if someone like me is sitting there going, "Oh, we've been talking about this for 8 hours," and then I'd realize that you'd taken it all in and you had a detailed summary of what we'd said, and you kind of had, you know, completely debunked most of it in a way that most normal people would be sort of, you know, climbing the wall. It was a fantastic experience of actually just being in the room and engaging. Someone like me, I just had to pick my moments, pick my little things that I was going to fight for.
Like the ninja, silent but deadly.
Like the ninja. Well, that's John Custy. He's the ITSM ninja. But, you know, just, you know, you have, it's like a sales technique, really. You sit there and you wait for when's the right time to come. But it was a fantastic experience.
I mean, I don't think you were the only one on the panel discussion on Wednesday. Mauricio mentioned something very similar about how frustrating the whole. Do we call it a practice? Do we call it a capability discussion? Which in his mind just went on and on and on and on, and he was thinking to himself, at some point, you just want to say, "Does it matter? Does it matter?" But you know, it does matter, and that's why we took so much time about it.
Yeah, I mean, there were things like, I do remember moments where I would say, right, I am going to come in this one. And it was, you know, things like how we describe non-productive work and stuff. And I remember that one in particular. I was like, no, we can't use that because our audience is, you know, are doing that sort of thing. So, but the rest of the time it was sort of, yeah, it might as well have been Spanish or Dutch or Russian, whatever people was. Maybe it was. Maybe I didn't tune into that. Maybe everybody was speaking in Spanish.
Fair enough. And Stuart, same question to yourself. What were your sort of fondest memories of that development period? And is there anything that you worked on that you're particularly proud of that you'd like to highlight?
There's a couple of bits that I was certainly very pleased with. The whole concept of moving away from delivering value to our customers and kind of dumping it on them to co-creating value with our customers. Now, it sounds really simple and obvious. In fact, it comes from a long history of service science out of a whole load of academics. And it reminds me of what Barclay was just talking about, his philosophy lessons at university, because it is highly theoretical, but then it comes out highly practical. And I was really proud of the way we did that. The guiding principles, I love the guiding principles. We've gone from adopt and adapt, you work it out, to here are, and the guiding principles, you can think of them as enabling constraints. If you're familiar with Kinevin and this idea that once you're working in a complex environment, you need enabling constraints that help you make the right decisions. That's what those guiding principles are. I love them. And what I particularly liked was we used those guiding principles in many of our discussions. So somewhere along the 8-hour discussion of, shall we call it a practice, shall we call it a capability, shall we call it a pair of shoes, somebody would say, can we focus on value here, folks? And it would get the whole room moving back towards what was important. Similarly, when we were defining the practices and somebody said, we really do need to think and work holistically, not just focus on the operational stuff, it was terribly helpful. And I'm really pleased with the way we managed to use our own guiding principles to kind of haul ITIL 4 up by its bootstraps.
Yeah,
One
sure.
last thing I'll mention. I think Roman does himself a disservice. I think he made a huge contribution to the actual writing and creation of ITIL 4, not just to the selecting of people. And I think he's hugely under-recognized for the contribution he's made.
Oh, I've been telling him that for the last 3 years, honestly. He doesn't listen. I'll share some memories with as well. Stuart, you mentioned service science, and I still remember back to that day when I think Christian Nissen and Mark Smalley were invited for just one day in, I think, our final face-to-face workshop. And I remember Christian took a marker, went up to the whiteboard, and started talking about a woman who wanted to start a taxi company or minicab service or something like that. And he sketched out the whole of service dominant logic with that example. And I think I seem to remember looking around the room and everyone was just spellbound. Like the whole room was quiet because this stuff was just gold dust to us, That was one of my fondest memories. And I remember an exercise where I wrote all 26 ITIL version 3 processes and 4 functions on Post-it note and put a line of masking tape along one wall. And I said, right, if I put this Post-it note above this line, then we're going to talk about it in ITIL 4. If we put it below the line, we're not going to be talking about it in ITIL 4. And that opened up so much debate. And I remember, we were talking about, should access management be included? Or do we want to say that access management is request management plus information security management? That goes below the line. What about change coordination? What about this? What about that? And I think that was a fabulous sort of mini exercise that we had. And the other thing, I mean, if we're talking about sort of contributions that we've made, I don't think I did so much of a contribution on the writing side, but I think I helped. I seem to remember helping a fair amount with the diagrams, and I mean the diagrams are what they are right now. But the number of iterations I went through on those diagrams, I lost count. I remember at one point being told that my sketch for the service value chain was out of a McKinsey 1980s style report because it looked very 80s. I don't know what that meant, but I guess the only thing I could take away from it is it's not a modern looking representation of what we're trying to say. And there were so many times where I had to just scrap my drawings, go back to the drawing board. I won't hold it against you guys, but I think I was the punching bag of the architect team. I would always raise the questions that got shot down. As far as I'm concerned, at least we discussed them, but I think I was the punching bag.
Everybody had their say, and then you would come in with something, and it was either brilliant or there would be a long silence, and everybody kind of look at each other and go, right, lunch then. And, so 1 out of 3 or 4 of them, fantastic. But there was others where we would just go, yeah.
And we felt sorry.
I have to admit, there were times when I thought Roman would find some busy work for me to go off and do on the side, so I wouldn't be in the next workshop. But it all ended up fine.
You are being the ambassador.
You just reminded me of something, actually, which also contributed to ITIL 4, although you might not be aware of it. Some years ago, well before ITIL Practitioner, a group of us formed a little clique to go and look at and think about service architectures and what would be an architecture for service management. And we got AXELOS to fund us. And that was where I first did any serious work with Mark Smalley and Christian Nissen, which is why you reminded me of it, and where I learned about service dominant logic and service science. And a surprising amount of that architecture work that we did from way back then has found its way into the detail of ITIL 4, like co-creation of value. So ITIL 4 isn't new things that have sprung up from nowhere. It's a distillation of great practice that has been around for a long time. And I think we've done a great job of updating the guidance to really good stuff that people were already doing.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. So now let's fast forward to today. And how have we seen the global community react to this updated body of knowledge? What successes have we seen? And equally, where do you think there is still opportunity for more guidance, clarifications, and so on? And Marcel, I'll come to you first with this one. How have things been across your clients in Europe?
Yeah, I think it is really it's a very positive direction. People are enthusiastic and they really recognize the value of ITIL 4. What they really like are the guiding principles. That's really valuable. And another important aspect is that people realize that they need to involve the stakeholders already from the early start. For every initiative, they need to think about the co-creation to make their colleagues a part of the solution and to what is necessary to prevent that they are becoming a part of the problem, right? That is really valuable. Another valuable thing from ITIL 4 is moving away from process thinking, which is more or less an horizontal siloed approach, to a value stream approach. That is also really valuable, but on the other side, for many companies, that's a real challenge for them. So what exactly is a value stream, and what is the difference between a value stream and a process? Yeah, I can explain it, but they are suffering and struggling with it, and how to organize and implement value streams in the organizations. That are many companies are struggling with that.
That's a fair point. We do hear about that quite a bit, actually.
There's a chance there to do something more with these value streams. Absolutely,
it is a fair point. And we'll talk about that a little bit more down the line as well in the 20 minutes we have left. But staying with one foot in Europe and one foot in the UK, I'll come to you, Roman. You have conversations.
The UK is Europe.
Geographically, yes. Well said. But let's not go there on this call unless we want to break out some drinks. But one foot in continental Europe and one foot in the UK. Roman, you have a lot of conversations with people, especially across Europe, I think, over the last several years. Indeed, around the world, but I think a lot of your network is based in Europe. How have you seen ITIL 4 land around the world, in Europe, with your network, with your former clients and colleagues?
I'm not sure what is exactly the reason for that, but I haven't heard let's say bad words about ITIL 4 from anyone. And that probably is because I'm not the best person to say bad words about ITIL 4 too. But is there any correlation between me speaking and Stuart disappearing, I wonder?
We've lost Stuart again.
So no, I haven't heard anything specifically bad about ITIL 4, except of course for Michael's comment about enabling now in chat. I definitely second Marcel's opinion on value stream mapping. I believe it's one of the very important key concepts, and it's definitely under-articulated, under-communicated. We have to add, and fortunately with current ITIL architecture, we can add more content on any topic we want, and value stream mapping is one of those. Another very important thing that I believe was under-communicated, and fortunately I see that things are changing in this area. Although in ITIL 3 everything was about processes, in ITIL 4 we decoupled practices from the core books, and some people do not pay enough attention to practices and they remain underused. So I will probably take this opportunity to reiterate, after you've got foundation or any other ITIL exam, you have a 1 year free access to the library of practices, which is totally, like all practices are more or less equal in scope, in number of pages to all books or all other books of ITIL. And it's available either for free or for 50 pounds per year plus VAT, so 60. And it's a great value for money. And this is something that I keep recommending people, like after your foundation, next step, explore My AXELOS. Focus on the practices that resonate with your daily practice, or harvest the content that is there, even if you have been doing this area like incident management or change management, enablement, control, whatever you call it, for years. You will find something interesting, new, challenging, and thought-provoking in ITIL practices. And we are updating them now based on the feedback, because we published the last batch of practices on 1st of May 2020. So it's a year soon, and we are now reviewing and updating practices based on the feedback.
I mean, and that was the entire point of decoupling them, so that we could update them quickly.
Yeah, to keep them updatable without the need for a major release of the overall framework. So the most stable things, the more like core and defining things are in the books. The most practical and flexible and fast developing things are in the practice guides, and therefore online, and therefore decoupled. Yes, that's exactly one of the architecture solutions I really find valuable and right in ITIL 4.
And it goes, just to add to that, for our audience's benefit, if you haven't quite figured out how to get access to My AXELOS, where all these practice publications are housed, please do email us at membership@axelos.com, and the memberships team should be able to sort you out. And as Roman said, there's a lot of information out there in My AXELOS. I think we actually did a back of the envelope calculation, and across all the published books, Foundation and the Managing Professional books and the Digital and IT Strategy book, I think we have somewhere in the region of about 1,000 pages worth of content. Of course, that includes table of contents, and it's the whole thing. But if you were to add up all the practice content, I think it worked out to somewhere around 1,200 or 1,300 pages, if I recall, somewhere in that region. So we actually have more guidance published as practices than we do in the core book. So it's definitely worth your while to have a look at that. Stuart, welcome back. Hopefully you won't be cut off mid-sentence as well. But how have you seen ITIL 4 land with your consulting and training clients, and what successes have you seen?
I've seen some very interesting stuff combining some of the new practice content with the idea of using value streams rather than processes. One of the areas where ITIL version 3 and previous versions generally was most badly adopted and most hated was in what was then called change management. There were so many disputes, disagreements, disaffections over you want me to do what, and it wasn't helpful. And what I'm seeing with increasing speed is organizations taking ideas from ITIL change enablement practice into value streams. They're not trying to adopt it by itself. They're saying, how can I become agile change enablers? And they're practically doing things to make it happen. It's absolute pleasure to watch.
I second that. In fact, small self-plug, I'm going to be speaking at Atlassian Teams, which is an online Atlassian hosted conference at the end of April. And I'm doing a talk with somebody from the Co-op, which is a UK conglomerate. And we're talking about how ITIL4 and their ways of working combined to create change enablement for their digital and agile team. So absolutely second that, Stuart. Barclay, same question. With the work that you've done, not only with your consulting clients domestically, but as I said in the introduction, you do work with, for example, Service Desk Institute, and you do some work around the world as well. How have you seen ITIL4 land in various communities?
Well, very well. I mean, I agree with Roman. Nobody says anything significantly negative about it at all. It's been overwhelmingly positive, and that even includes some of those who in the past may have been quite negative about ITIL. You know, publicly negative about ITIL, which surprised me. But I mean, there are several things that I do see and have seen more of, and I do quite a lot of, you know, half-day, one-day workshops and briefings and that sort of thing. And the interest is there. And it's much wider than it ever was with just service management. So regularly have architects and, you know, BAs and developers and project leads and those kind of people, as well as people beyond. I mean, I am quite interested at the moment in this whole idea of taking it outside of the IT world, and that has been growing for a while, but I think it's becoming more pervasive, and it's probably more accessible for. I mean, ITIL Foundation now is much more accessible for non-IT people than it was. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and that means that you can include a wider community for collaboration, for doing stuff across an organization. So I've seen a lot of that. I recently did some briefings, big corporation in the UK with their senior people, and it was really interesting because, you know, some of them were quite, you know, well, we're already way down a agile path, but, you know, and I was able to get them interested and engaged with the service management side of things, and that kind of leads into the product management discussion, and you know, we haven't mentioned this, but we did take a decision to try and use as much product management language and thinking in what we did, and you know, we had some people there who were extremely well versed in that, which I think helped, and I do see that helping. I do see that being something that's filtering through, where there's much more realization and understanding that, yeah, we should all be working together. It's much better than the ITIL versus DevOps stupid hype debate that was there for a while, you know, and if you do one or other, you die. It's much more, yeah, well, how do we really do this together, and it'll make that work across the organization. So, you know, the interest is there, the scope and the breadth of people, and I mean, recently I've been Malaysia, a few US clients as well as UK and Middle East as well. They're all aware of it. They're all doing it. They're all seeing it. And even if they haven't been exposed to it, you know, it doesn't take long to get them into it. It's so much easier, I think, to get them interested in it and to understand the core parts of it than what we had before. That's huge. I think that you can do an elevator pitch, and you can do a business pitch, and say this is what it really is, and how it works, and it isn't that what you do as well. Whereas before it was too difficult to do, or took too long to. By the time you got there, they lost the will, and so on. So I definitely seeing a lot more success in that and value in that, with, you know, organizations really tuning into it.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. I mean, I have very recently had many conversations with tool vendors who are hearing about ITIL4, interest in ITIL4 from their clients and their prospects, which I think is really good, because it's not just knowledge that you pick up in a classroom. It's now starting to become knowledge that you're trying to, in some places, standardize what you're doing and enforcing that, you know, moving from to I think, Stuart, you mentioned the term enabling constraint, but moving from enabling constraint to governing constraints through the use of tool sets, baking some of that intelligence into tool sets and workflows and so on. So it's interesting to see how that has taken shape. I do agree with Roman that value stream mapping definitely needs some additional publication, some additional guidance. It is something that we are starting to talk about internally, what the best format is going to be, what the best communication style is going to be, and how, whom to be involved and so on. So, you know, all I can say is watch this space, you know, follow me on LinkedIn, or follow Roman on LinkedIn, or even the AXELOS channel on LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. And we'll be publicizing what we're working on as closer to the date of publication. And I'll take a couple of questions from the audience because which we've started to touch on right now. Daniel Breston asks, if you had more time, what would you like to have added? And second question that he's put in is, a year later, what do you think should have been reworded or not included? Which is a provocative question, which perhaps which will spur some interesting discussion, I hope. Stuart, let me come to you first with that question. I probably won't go to everyone, but I'll pick a couple of people to answer this.
I don't have an immediate answer. Let me think on it for a second.
All right, I'll
come back to you.
I'll bounce from you. I'll bounce from you to Marcel, because he looked like he was about to say something.
Yeah, thank you. Something that I actually want to add is about problem management. You know, still when you look at the practices of incident management and problem management and change enablement, then we are very good in describing what we should do in which order to be able to manage incidents and problems and manage changes, more or less. But how to solve incidents, how to solve problems, and how to implement changes successfully, maybe we should provide more guidance on that. Referring to methodologies that were mentioned in the ITIL 3 operation book, like Captain Trago, Captain Fury, these kind of things. I think that would also help the community to become better in that, because many organizations are still very good in implementing easy to explain but wrong solutions.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Stuart?
I think probably the thing we needed to do more of is not content, but reaching out to people who do not have an operational focus. ITIL has an historical IT operations background. The content is now much, much wider than that. And I'm starting to see interest from outside of the IT operations space. We certainly, in the authoring team, started to pick up people who worked in software development, who worked in strategy and so on. So I'm happy that the content is pretty good. I'm not happy that we've yet managed to reach out effectively to a diverse enough audience.
Interesting. I will come to one more person, and that would be Roman, given your position as the sort of person who manages ITIL product development. Looking back on ITIL 4 Foundation, is there anything that you wish you'd had time to add as part of that project?
If you're asking specifically about Foundation, then I will just repeat that statement about the value stream mapping. I believe that we could put a bit less emphasis on service value chain and like practices in each step, and a bit more on integration of that. Stuart did a great job by with that examples that are value stream examples at the end of the book. It helps a lot, but it helps a lot because it doesn't have enough theory on value stream and value stream mapping. It just passed by. So I would probably take all the time we spent on mapping service value chain steps and practices and spend that time and space on value stream mapping.
So take back the time we spent on 34 heat maps and use that.
Yes.
That's a fair point.
I'd agree with that.
This is a fair point. I mean, I'll throw in one as well for info as a wish list from time gone by. I would have liked to have added one more guiding principle. which would have been something along the lines of have empathy or behave ethically. Because I think that's, on one hand, I know why we didn't. It's because we thought that this was a given that we have human beings who work in organizations for other human beings. But, very cynically, I think that many organizations and systems incentivize their staff to not necessarily behave unethically, but not to think about how to be more ethical and more unbiased and more inclusive in their approaches to service management. So I would have liked to have maybe added in another guiding principle around empathy or ethics. I mean, we talk about it in drive stakeholder value and high velocity IT, but I would have liked to have probably brought that in at the foundation level. Let's move on. There's a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly, Jan Kotzi. Any work planned for how ITIL 4 interacts with other standards like COBIT 2019 or DevOps, etc.? Since DevOps is mentioned, Marcel, I'll come to you. You do a lot of work with DASA. You are part of many camps. Is there any sort of existing literature that you can perhaps point Jan to?
Not specific. That's not there yet. But maybe that's an interesting area to explore further. Yeah, especially the alignment between ITIL 4 and DASA DevOps, but there is a strong alignment connection already with COBIT 2019. That's another. So COBIT is also about adopt and adapt. So you can easily adapt also these COBIT object governance and management objectives / processes to the ITIL 4 area actually. So yeah, use it the way you want to use it, but I don't think there is an official guideline yet or publication about that area yet. No.
I mean, I think I get this question a lot. I don't know about you guys, but I get these sorts of questions a lot, and my it's not a standard response, but my response is typically along the lines of, look, all these frameworks are very context laden. The answer really depends on what industry you're working in, which part of the organization you're working in, what objectives. There is no singular solution to say this is one integration point, that is another integration point, and your third one is over there, because it could be radically different from one company to the next. And the only thing I can point to as perhaps an integration point is the guiding principles, because I can say, look, whether you're ITIL 4 plus whatever other framework, how are you focusing on value? How are you looking to collaborate and promote visibility across the organization? How are you looking to work in an iterative way with constant feedback, etc.? So I tend to just point to the guiding principles as a place to start, but I'm slightly shy of sort of saying, here's a definitive guide to how ITIL 4 will work with this other framework, because the answer changes.
If I may, every framework has its own background, right? And it's not about making a choice, or we need to do ITIL, or we need to do COBIT, or we need to do DevOps. No, depending on your challenge, you use multiple things from all the frameworks that are out there.
That's right. Yeah. We do have one last question from Donna, but I'm not going to open this to the panel because we're almost out of time. Donna Knapp did ask about case studies, about how people are leveraging ITIL 4. So Donna, we certainly on the AXELOS website do publish case studies quite regularly. So some of the recent notable ones have been, last year we had Spotify and Vodafone. And I think towards the end of this year, end of last year, we had City of Pittsburgh, or maybe that was January of this year. But then we also had CERN, and the CERN one also talked about enterprise service management or ITIL in non-IT contexts. So we do try to publish as many as we can. But there are also some case studies that you'll find on websites of consultancies around the world or tool vendors around the world. So we're not necessarily the definitive source or the only source of those case studies, but there are case studies being published every month, every other month. And to the audience in general, if you would like to publish your story, your adoption story, please do get in touch with us. Send an email to ask@axelos.com or reach out to me through LinkedIn, and we'll get you sorted. So we're actually on the top of the hour, so we're probably exceeding by another 30 seconds. I'd like to thank all the lead architects who have joined me today. Roman Zhuravlev, the person whose vision is ITIL 4, who continues to drive ITIL 4 forward as well. Thank you for joining us. Marcel Federer from ITpreneurs. You can find a lot more about Marcel on LinkedIn as well as the ITpreneurs website. Barclay Ray, author, consultant at barclayray.com, also the host of Enterprise Digital Podcast, which you can find on all major platforms. And last but certainly not least, Stuart Rance, trainer, consultant, and a man with 1,000 suits. Can be found at optimalservicemanagement.com.
And Akshay Anand, who also is a man with 1,000 suits or hats or roles, who is not only ITIL ambassador, but also one of the key minds behind ITIL content.
You're too kind.
For hosting this as well.
You're too kind. You're too kind. Thank you. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me, LinkedIn is the best. And just another very quick plug. There's a wonderful group forum on Facebook called Back to ITSM. We're all part of Back to ITSM. There's some fabulous conversations that go on over there. Not your sort of standard run-of-the-mill, how do I pass ITIL 4 Foundation sort of thing, but it's more about how do I apply the concepts, how do I solve this sort of an issue, how do I approach this challenge. So there's a lot of very, very interesting conversations that tend to happen on Back to ITSM, sharing of interesting blogs and essays and so on. So if you're interested, do check out Back to ITSM as well. Until then, I hope you've joined. I hope you've enjoyed. The last few live sessions that we've done celebrating ITIL 4 turning 2 or ITIL 4 Foundation turning 2. Maybe we'll have another one to celebrate each of the Managing Professional modules. Who knows? But until we see each other again, lovely audience and architect team members, please stay safe, wear a mask, and remember to wash your hands.
Thank you, Akshay.